Good evening. Thanks for coming back. This is another episode from Bambergate, the channel that looks into the framing of Jeremy Bamber and the issues surrounding the case with the government and the justice system and the police, and how they resolve the fact that they framed one of the most famous prisoners in the British justice system in the last 100 years. This episode deals with undercover police officers and their involvement in other campaigns throughout the last 3 decades, and their inquiry that's happening now regarding the history of those cases. So what I'm going to do is put the perspective on Jeremy's case and raise some interesting points and questions, and hopefully you find this interesting, and hopefully halfway through the video or at the end of the video, or maybe a few days after you've watched this video, maybe you will understand why I'm making this point, and why Bambergate, the framing of Jeremy Bamber, will continue to cause problems for the government until a resolution is found. Covering up isn't working, so we need to find somewhere else. So, undercover officers. Well, I always like asking questions that I know the answer to. When you ask somebody a question you don't know whether they're telling you the answer or not, it's not very revealing. If you ask people questions that you know the answer to, you can then find a lot more out to how they answer the question, whether they answer it truthfully, whether they generally don't know the answer, and things like that. So what we do know is Jeremy's case is exceptionally important. He's a high-profile prisoner. He's served many years in prison. Obviously what happened on the evening which was surrounding the farmhouse, with officers obviously looking to see in the farmhouse, what we see in the evidence is curtains moving, lights going on. We now hear from the submission that there was a phone call from the farmhouse. Some ambulances arrived at the farmhouse, so a 999 call and things like that. So obviously, really important case in justice. Something I always say that I like to explain to people is that Jeremy, is not a miscarriage of justice. Obviously, the police officers, if Sheila's moving around in the farmhouse, it is impossible to make the point that Jeremy is a miscarriage of justice. And I'll criticise Jeremy for describing his case as that. I don't subscribe to that at all. I describe his case as a framing. Obviously, really important and really interesting to know that if we want to know the truth, look in the original handwritten documents like in Hillsborough, and you will get to the truth very easily. And of course, so we know those things are facts. We know those things about the case. And of course, what we know now, which is being covered at the moment in the press, is that the police forces have routinely, on a fairly large scale, used undercover officers to influence campaigns that would challenge the efficiency of the police, and maybe the image that how effective they are at dealing with crime. So the logic would be Jeremy's case is a great big potential problem for them, and they have a long history of undercover operations. And if you take a look at Jeremy's case in specifics, you see right from the trial, removal of evidence, destruction of certain evidence, withholding, editing, evidence being placed under gagging order. So there's a great deal of shenanigans in Jeremy's case. That the police have engaged in these undercover operations, and that Jeremy's case is an exceptionally high-profile case that has the potential to do lots of damage to confidence in the police, the justice system, and the government that signed the gagging order, the Conservative government, at the time that the gagging order was signed. So the obvious question, do they engage in undercover or subversive operations to manage the outcome of Jeremy's campaign? Now, as some of you well know, I started many years ago contacting police officers. I don't live in the UK, and at the time I was contacting a police officer, Ivan Montgomery, who is a resident in Melbourne, Australia. He wasn't a UK resident, and I was threatened by a employed senior Essex police officer. I received an email telling me basically to stop doing what I was doing, and initially I was a bit taken aback, a bit shocked, but because of my personality, it kind of didn't have the right effect. It actually motivated me even more. Thank you very much, Essex Police, for doing that. You really scored a home goal there, but anyway, that's, you know, not the first time you've done it. Anyway, you know, so I know personally that it happens in the background, and over my years of involvement with the case, I have observed a number of other instances where I question the the frequency of events. So if you take a look at the involvement of television producers, so most of you would never have remembered or seen Jeremy's previous campaign website. He used to have a website that had a black background, which was never a very good choice of colour, to be quite honest. White's better. It signifies something. But anyway, he had this old website. I use the word black so you know which one, whether you remember it or not. And there was something written on the very first page, on the very first line, and that was that he was looking for a documentary maker to discuss and present his case, you know, basically out there. I mean, Jeremy actually even called a local radio station once and got himself on air, which of course, you know, didn't go down very well. But Jeremy, you know, had done this in the past, and he was trying to do it through his webpage. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Obviously, other people have a different opinion. But we had, obviously, the involvement of Mark Williams Thomas. And he is obviously an ex-police officer, and he is, I think, from Essex. And he produced a documentary that looked at the presented evidence. It was called Bamber, the New Evidence. It seemed to miss out some basic principles of the case, and I actually spoke to Mark Williams Thomas before the airing of the documentary because he wanted to know who I had been contacting, what sort of responses I had, and we had a discussion about Julie Mugford and Taff Jones at the time from memory. I think there might have been some other aspects that we covered. And what surprised me in his documentary is that he didn't present the simplicity of the case, which is very important and very simple to know the truth. And obviously Essex Police have a very, very long and clear history of destroying specific evidence that would have shown that they didn't frame Jeremy. So I don't think it was particularly a difficult narrative for a skilled documentary maker to present. But anyway, he chose to do a documentary on the burn marks of a gun on pigskin and whether or not a silencer. I don't find that particularly definitive in terms of explaining to people what actually happened. But anyway, he produced that documentary, and I exchanged some emails with him after, you know, just for sort of my own thing of, you know, do you understand the case? Do you get what it's about? I mean, you know, he demonstrated, you know, with Savile that he was very good at sort of saying, well, you know, without any evidence, you know, a lot of people who are saying the same things about one guy and one guy who's denying it, you know, who do we believe? Well, these people have never met each other. They're telling similar or identical stories about the guy, and statistically that's virtually impossible unless it's true. And that was the brunt of his Savile documentary. And of course there was no evidence, there was no DNA, and I think that he and the viewer came to the right conclusion about who to believe. So I think he demonstrated his ability to do that with Savile, and it kind of left me significantly interested to why he hadn't done the same with Jeremy Bamber, and that's why I wrote to him and emailed him, and we emailed backwards and forwards for a bit of time afterwards, and he said, yeah, if sometime in the future I'd like to come back to it, and we're many, many years later and we haven't come back to it. So I always found that quite interesting. And then obviously you know of the dramatisation recently of the Bamber killings, which was based on Carol Ann Lee's book. Carol Ann Lee lived in Holland, Amsterdam, which is not so far from where I live, and she spoke Dutch. And I remember hearing that she was going to write a book, and because she wasn't based in the UK, and I know there had been, you know, ultimately, you know, for me, issues I could see that maybe somebody in the UK might have more problems writing a book on the real facts of the case, I thought it would be a great opportunity to make contact with her before she wrote the book and just make her aware of the simplicity of the case, the importance of the case, the storyline of the case, the background of the case, and I tried again for some time to get in contact with her. I did notice that I had a book on pre-order, and I did notice there was a very, very long time in delivery from the acceptance of the order. So there appeared to be a long gap that doesn't seem to be accounted for of what happened in the writing of the book. But as you know from her book, if you've read it, you should do, because it's quite interesting. Again, similar to Mark Williams Thomas, she does not state the simplicity of the case. Very important case, very easy to find the truth out, and clearly not a miscarriage of justice if Sheila's seen walking around and moving around and switching lights on and off and found, what was it, one male, one female in the kitchen, a further 3 upstairs, and certainly making phone calls from inside the farmhouse. It would have to be one of the most important framings, you know, in British legal history, and obviously quite embarrassing for the government. But it's interesting that she received a great deal of support from the officers around the farmhouse, and the campaign website have tried to engage in an open discussion with her, you know, about the facts of the case, which strangely enough she has not seemed to engage with. And obviously, you know, that's gone out onto British television, and it's, as I understand, in the process of being released onto Netflix. So if you put yourself upon the perspective of, let's say, the legal justice system government, Jeremy's line on his old website of "I'd like to get a documentary interested" might have had the effect that they might have said, well, if Jeremy's able to control the narrative and the general public hear of the narrative of he's framed, you know, and it would be easy to prove that, you know, that might not be very good from our point of view in terms of managing the case. So you might say, well, there's a bit questioning there. You know, we know that they engage in this activity. We know in Jeremy's case they've engaged in that activity. We know they've got a lot to lose. So we see a pattern of behaviour. And last year I met with a company that was just started up by Louis Theroux, and I went to London to actually meet them, and I spoke to the producer that was actually responsible for making it, Louis Theroux's wife, Nancy, and Louis Theroux was there as well. I spoke to him about the case, and again, a very interesting background story, because the reason I actually went there, I got a bit of confession. I think they thought they were interviewing me and stuff, but I wanted to see face to face their reaction when I went through the basics of the case, supported by the evidence, and presented to them that, you know, this is a case not about a man's conviction. This is a case about the integrity of the government and the justice system. And it's easy to find out who's telling the truth. You know, it's like Stephen Avery. You know, do you look at Stephen Avery whether he did or didn't? I mean, that's what the premise of the program about. But I think as you watch it, you begin to look more at the justice system and say, did they frame this guy to get themselves out of a large legal, you know, lawsuit? Is that what's going on here? And when I met with the 3 people from Minehouse Productions, you know, Louis Theroux's production company, that's what I was looking for, is that, you know, were they going to come back with any challenges? Were they going to come back by saying, you know, we don't believe this, or this is not really of interest to us? And definitely it wasn't. It was something that really served their interest. And interestingly, halfway through, you know, Nancy made a very, very good point. She said, you know, you're making allegations against the police force, and that's very difficult to do, or very dangerous to do, without evidence to support it. And, you know, I was quite happy she asked this question, because I responded and said, well, you don't need to make allegations. You can simply show what pieces of evidence have been destroyed. I said you could set, you know, the simple question, what if this guy was framed? And I said you could, you know, look at the destruction of evidence, look at the public interest immunity, and I said you could examine events and other documents that are available and show there were very good records of what happened, and simply say the key ones are missing. And obviously most people, like in Jimmy Savile, are able to work out for themselves who's telling the truth. And, you know, she sort of looked at me, and she sort of, this smile came across her face, and she sort of nodded, and it was, you know, I thought she was like, yeah, okay, point taken. We don't need to make the accusations the viewer can work out what's being said here, and there's a way round it. I personally am not afraid about saying it. I think that Essex police are in a corner about defending themselves. I think it would cause them more problems in saying that they didn't frame Jeremy Bamber than just keeping quiet. So I don't think that they're particularly interested in suing people for that, drawing lots of attention to themselves. I think that would simply cause them greater problems than just keeping quiet. So, but anyway, in terms of are there undercover officers involved in the impeding Jeremy's campaign team, or Jeremy or other people around, or the public finding out that, I think from history, from what they've done in Jeremy Bamber's case, what they've done in other cases, how prolific they have used undercover officers, I think that in a modern world, I think the old way of doing things, just putting undercover officers are in there, are maybe not what they're doing at the moment, but I struggle to believe that they aren't making efforts to try and push the effectiveness of Jeremy's campaign team backwards. I believe it is highly likely that they are doing that, and I certainly see evidence of that. Maybe that's quite surprising, and maybe some people find that a bit frustrating. I have a different perception. I think that, like with everything in the Jeremy Bamber case, had they just dealt with things at the front end and said, we're not going to pursue a conviction, we're just going to take the criticism, they wouldn't be where they are now. And the more that they fight things, the more that they take more extreme action to try and keep this, I think that the end result is likely to be even worse if they didn't take these actions. So I actually think it's quite useful if they were to use undercover officers, if they were to make subversive attempts to try and control the narrative that the public sees on Jeremy's campaign, and fix the narrative of watch the dramatisation so you are absolutely clear of what happened. I mean, clearly doesn't deal with a lot of the critical parts of the case. I think that simply will, at the end, cause actually more interest in the case, and of course more of a pop at the end. So I don't think that those things work long term in the favour of the police. I think they work long term in the favour of the campaign team. So it creates an interesting dynamic, and there are a number of counter opportunities that arise from that situation, which obviously anybody that's interested in assisting Jeremy, I count myself as one of those people, might be tuned into or looking for. So just to summarise, that's an episode on what we know to be the historical facts about undercover police officers trying to infiltrate campaign teams that might damage the reputation of the police, although legal, and trying to influence their outcome, with the perspective specifically on Jeremy's case, and that they might be doing that. Please do not start all looking between the members of the campaign team. You can have healthy suspicions. I don't think that's a problem, but if you have genuine concerns, maybe, I suggested to the campaign team maybe a database of campaigners, some routine background checks and things like that. I certainly would be more than happy for anybody to take a look into my history. I read something online that somebody said he looks like an ex-copper, but rest assured, if you want any of my details, I would be very, very cooperative. You can meet any part of my family. That part of my history would be very easy to prove my background and things like that. But anyway, hopefully a very interesting episode, and hopefully you can understand that there are still many, many opportunities that we have to assist Jeremy and assist the justice system and the government in making the decision that it is better that we move forward and deal with a long-term situation between Bambergate, which is the framing of Jeremy Bamber. Anyway, good evening. Have a nice evening, and hopefully you'll tune in for the next episode of Bambergate, the framing of Jeremy Bamber. Thanks very much. Good night.